Rain struck the windows of Blackmoor station with a steady rhythm, turning the lamps outside into blurred halos of pale gold. It was nearly midnight, and the platform was almost deserted. A porter wheeled the last luggage trolley toward the storage shed, while the station master glanced up at the clock for what felt like the 100th time that evening. The final service of the night stood waiting beneath a veil of steam. Locals called it the Blackmoor Express, though there was nothing particularly express about it. The aging train wound its way across lonely stretches of countryside, crossed forgotten villages, and finally climbed into the hills where the town of Blackmoor waited in permanent silence. Most passengers boarded because they had to. Very few traveled for pleasure. Detective Inspector Nathan Mercer stepped onto the platform carrying a worn leather satchel instead of a suitcase. Officially, he was taking compassionate leave after closing a difficult case in London. Unofficially, he needed somewhere quiet enough to hear himself think. Blackmoor seemed ideal. The guard checked his ticket before nodding him toward carriage 4. "You're lucky," the man said. "Not many passengers tonight." Mercer smiled politely. "I wasn't looking for company. You may change your mind before sunrise." The remark lingered longer than Mercer expected. Inside the carriage, warmth replaced the chill of the platform. Lamps fixed above each compartment cast soft amber light across polished wood panels that had seen better decades. The train carried the unmistakable scent of old leather, damp wool, and freshly brewed coffee drifting from the dining carriage. Mercer settled into compartment 6. Across from him sat an elderly woman carefully knitting a navy blue scarf. Every few moments she counted stitches beneath her breath before beginning another row. Next to the window, a young university student highlighted pages in an engineering textbook while quietly tapping a pencil against his knee. Further along the corridor, laughter echoed from a businessman speaking far too loudly into his telephone. It seemed ordinary, comfortably ordinary. Exactly the sort of journey people forgot within days. At 11:58 p.m. the whistle sounded. The train eased forward. London disappeared into the darkness. Nearly an hour later, Mercer wandered toward the dining carriage in search of coffee. The train rocked gently beneath his feet as fields slipped unnoticed beyond the windows. Outside, there was almost nothing to see except rain and occasional flashes of moonlight breaking through thick clouds. The dining carriage was sparsely occupied. A nurse traveling home after a double shift stirred sugar into tea. A middle-aged couple argued in hushed voices over a folded letter. Neither wanted the other to read. Near the far window sat a man dressed in a charcoal overcoat. He wore black gloves despite the warmth. A neatly folded newspaper rested beside him. As Mercer passed, the stranger looked up. Their eyes met for only a second. The man's expression wasn't fearful. It wasn't friendly either. It was recognition, as though he already knew exactly who Nathan Mercer was. Mercer slowed. "Have we met?" The stranger considered the question before answering. "I don't believe so." His voice was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." "Perhaps." Mercer ordered coffee and took a seat nearby. For several minutes neither man spoke. The stranger simply stared through the rain-covered window, watching his own reflection more than the countryside outside. When Mercer finally glanced back, the seat was empty. The cup remained. The newspaper remained. The man had vanished. Mercer searched every carriage. There was nowhere obvious he could have gone. No toilets occupied. No smoking vestibules. No staff compartments. Nothing. The conductor frowned when Mercer described him. "Sir, no one matching that description boarded this train. I spoke to him less than 5 minutes ago." I'm afraid that's impossible. Mercer felt irritation rising. There was a man wearing black gloves sitting by the window. The conductor shook his head. You've been sitting in that carriage alone since we left Ashcombe. Mercer stared. That's ridiculous. I walked through there twice. And you were reading the timetable. Mercer opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Reading the timetable. He couldn't remember doing that. At 2:13 a.m., the train entered the Blackridge Tunnel. The tunnel stretched for nearly 4 miles through solid rock. Passengers often joked that once you entered it, time itself slowed. Inside, every window became a mirror. The lights flickered once. Then again. Darkness swallowed the train for less than 2 seconds. When the lights returned, someone screamed. Mercer ran toward the sound. Compartment 9. The university student stood frozen in the doorway. His engineering book lay open on the floor. He couldn't speak. He simply pointed. Inside the compartment, every seat was empty. Except one. Resting neatly against the window was a leather briefcase. Its handle was still warm. On the seat beside it lay a ticket, stamped only moments earlier. Passenger name, Daniel Ashcroft. Mercer frowned. I've never heard that name. The conductor's face drained of color. His hands began to tremble. No. What is it? The conductor looked from the ticket to the empty seat. His voice dropped to little more than a whisper. Daniel Ashcroft disappeared from this very train. He swallowed hard. 25 years ago. Silence that followed the conductor's words settled over the carriage like a heavy blanket. No one spoke. The rhythmic clatter of the train over the rails seemed louder than before, echoing through the narrow corridors. Even the rain had stopped, leaving only the occasional groan of metal as the Blackmoor Express pressed deeper into the countryside. Detective Inspector Nathan Mercer picked up the ticket with a folded handkerchief. The cardstock felt new. The ink was crisp. The timestamp read 2:11 a.m. Barely 2 minutes earlier. This ticket wasn't printed 25 years ago, Mercer said. The conductor nodded nervously. I know. But you recognize the name. The older man hesitated before answering. I've worked this line for 30 years. Everyone who stays long enough hears the story. Mercer slipped the ticket into an evidence envelope from his satchel. Then tell me. The conductor glanced along the corridor, ensuring no passengers were close enough to overhear. In the spring of 2001, Daniel Ashcroft boarded the last train to Blackmoor. According to the ticket records, he entered carriage 4. The same carriage we're standing in. Yes. What happened? He never got off. Mercer frowned. People don't simply disappear from trains. That's exactly what everyone said. 25 years earlier, the railway police had searched every compartment, every luggage rack, every maintenance hatch beneath the carriages. Nothing. Daniel Ashcroft had vanished somewhere between Ashcombe Junction and Blackmoor Station. There had been no emergency stop. No reports of anyone opening an exterior door. No body was ever found. Eventually, investigators concluded he must somehow have left the train unnoticed. His family refused to believe it. The railway never found another explanation. Mercer listened carefully. Old mysteries had a habit of growing stranger with every retelling. Witnesses forgot details. Rumors filled the gaps. By the time enough years had passed, fact and fiction became almost impossible to separate. Still, one detail bothered him. If Ashcroft disappeared on this route, why are you frightened by a ticket? The conductor swallowed. Because his ticket was found exactly where you found this one. Mercer looked toward the empty seat. The same seat. The conductor nodded. Compartment 9, window side. A cold draft drifted through the carriage, despite every window being firmly shut. Word spread quickly. Within minutes, the passengers had gathered in small groups, whispering theories. Mercer decided to speak with each of them before memories became contaminated by conversation. He began with the university student. The young man introduced himself as Oliver Kent. He looked no older than 20. "You screamed," Mercer said gently. "What did you see?" Oliver shook his head. I didn't see anyone." "What made you shout?" "I came back from the toilet. And there was someone sitting there." He pointed toward the empty seat. "I only saw them for a second." Mercer's attention sharpened. "Describe them." "I can't. You must remember something." Oliver closed his eyes. "A dark coat." "What else?" "I honestly don't know." "Hair?" I don't think I noticed." "Face?" Oliver's breathing became shallow. "It's strange." "What is?" "I remember looking directly at them." "Yes. But now." He rubbed his forehead. "I can't picture a face at all." The elderly woman knitting in compartment 6 introduced herself as Margaret Ellis. Unlike Oliver, she remained remarkably composed. "You've been watching everyone since London," Mercer observed. She smiled faintly. "Old habits. Were you traveling alone?" "I always do." "Did you notice anything unusual tonight?" Mrs. Ellis paused before answering. "There was a gentleman sitting opposite me for nearly an hour." Mercer's pulse quickened. "The man in the black gloves." She looked puzzled. "I don't remember gloves." "What did he look like?" "He was reading." "What book?" "I couldn't say." "You spoke to him?" "No." "So you only remember seeing him?" "Yes." Mercer waited. After several seconds, her expression changed. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "That's odd." "What is?" "I can't remember his face either." By 2:30, Mercer had interviewed everyone aboard. The results made little sense. 6 passengers believed they had seen an unfamiliar man. Not one of them could describe him. A businessman insisted the stranger had a beard. A nurse was certain he had been clean-shaven. One passenger remembered a gray suit. Another swore it had been black. Yet all of them agreed on one thing. He had been there. Somewhere. At some point. Mercer returned to compartment 9. The briefcase remained untouched. No initials. No luggage label. Nothing to identify its owner. He unclipped the brass locks. Inside lay 3 objects. A silver pocket watch. A folded railway map. And an envelope. The envelope bore no stamp. No address. Only 2 handwritten words. For Mercer. His heartbeat slowed. He had never been to Blackmoor. He knew no one on the train. So how had someone prepared a letter with his name? Carefully, he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. One sentence had been written in elegant fountain pen ink. "If you're reading this, you're already too late." Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Mercer examined the paper under the compartment light. Fresh ink. No smudges. Whoever had written it had done so recently. Very recently. He checked the back. Blank. Then something caught his eye. Pressed lightly into the paper was another impression, almost invisible. Someone had written on the sheet above this one before tearing it away. Mercer angled the page toward the light. The faint grooves formed only part of a sentence. Meet me. Before Blackmoor. Trust no one. Before he could study it further, the train lurched violently. The emergency brakes screamed. Passengers cried out as luggage tumbled from the overhead racks. The Blackmoor Express shuddered to a halt in the middle of nowhere. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then came 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Not on a compartment door. Not from inside the carriage. From the outside of the train. Mercer looked through the rain-speckled window. The tracks stretched empty in both directions. No station. No crossing. No buildings. Only open moorland beneath a pale moon. Another 3 knocks echoed against the glass. This time, they came from the window directly beside him. Mercer stepped closer. There was no one there. Yet as he looked down, he saw something that hadn't been there moments before. A fresh footprint in the mud beside the tracks. Just one. Leading toward the train. None leading away the footprint shouldn't have existed. Nathan Mercer crouched beside the carriage door as the conductor unlocked it with trembling hands. Cold night air poured into the train, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and heather. The moor stretched in every direction, a rolling expanse of darkness broken only by the silver glow of the moon. Mercer climbed down onto the gravel. The footprint was clear. A polished leather shoe, size 10 or 11 by the look of it, had sunk into the soft ground less than a meter from the carriage. He swept his torch across the surrounding area. Nothing. No second print. No trail. No signs that anyone had approached or left. It was as though someone had stepped out of thin air, placed one foot on the earth, and vanished again. The conductor remained in the doorway. We should get back inside. Mercer didn't answer. He studied the rails instead. Fresh steel reflected the torchlight. The emergency stop had happened abruptly, but there was no obvious obstruction on the track. What caused the driver to stop? I don't know. Then let's ask him. The locomotive sat nearly 200 meters ahead. By the time Mercer reached it, the driver and his assistant were already inspecting the front of the train. Both looked bewildered. The driver introduced himself as Colin Fraser, a broad-shouldered man with 30 years of railway experience etched into his face. I've never seen anything like it, Fraser said. What happened? The warning system triggered. What warning system? Track obstruction. So there was something on the line. There should have been. Mercer followed him to the front of the locomotive. Mounted beneath the headlights was a camera used to record the track ahead. Fraser pointed toward the small monitor in the cab. I reviewed the last 30 seconds. And the system detected something. What? Fraser hesitated. I don't know. Mercer frowned. You don't know. It appeared for one frame. An animal. No. A person. Fraser looked uncomfortable. It looked like. He stopped. Like what? A man. Standing on the tracks. Standing perfectly still. Mercer's expression hardened. And then, the next frame was empty. Back inside the train, passengers had begun inventing explanations of their own. Mechanical failure. Trespassers. Sabotage. Ghosts. Mercer ignored the speculation. Fear encouraged imagination. Facts required patience. He returned to the dining carriage, where the station manager's emergency radio crackled with static. No signal. The surrounding hills blocked almost every transmission. Until the train reached Blackmoor, they were effectively isolated. Mercer gathered everyone into the dining carriage. "I appreciate this is unsettling," he began, "but until we understand what's happened, I'd like everyone to remain together." The businessman folded his arms. "Is this really necessary?" "It is. I'm due in Edinburgh by morning. So is everyone else." The man muttered something under his breath and sat down. Mercer looked around the room. 12 passengers, 3 railway staff, 1 detective. Someone was hiding something. He was certain of it. He decided to begin again. This time individually. Not to ask what people had seen. To ask what they hadn't said. The businessman was first. His ticket identified him as Richard Hale, Regional Sales Director. 48 years old. Wedding ring. Expensive watch. Mercer placed the anonymous letter on the table. "Have you seen this before?" "No." "Did you know Daniel Ashcroft?" "No." "Were you on this railway 25 years ago?" Hale laughed. "I'd have been in school." Mercer nodded. "Mind if I see your phone?" The smile disappeared. "Why?" "Routine. My phone has nothing to do with this." "Humor me." Reluctantly, Hale handed it over. Mercer wasn't interested in messages. He checked the photographs. One image caught his attention. Taken earlier that evening. The platform at London. The Blackmoor Express waiting to depart. Mercer zoomed in. Near the rear of the train stood a man in a charcoal overcoat. Black gloves. Watching the camera. The same man Mercer had spoken to in the dining carriage. "When did you take this?" "Around midnight." "Did you notice him?" Hale leaned closer. "No." "He's right there." Hale stared at the photograph for several seconds. "I don't remember anyone standing there." Mercer handed the phone back. The stranger appeared in photographs. Yet no one remembered seeing him. The next interview proved even stranger. Margaret Ellis placed her knitting neatly beside her teacup. "You've traveled this route before," Mercer said. "Many times." "When was the first?" She smiled sadly. "The year my husband proposed." "What brought you back tonight?" "I visit his grave every July." Mercer glanced at her ticket. "Return." "Not one way." "You plan to come home tomorrow?" "Yes." She looked toward the rain-streaked window. "My husband worked on these railways." Mercer's attention sharpened. "In what capacity?" "He was an engineer." "What was his name?" "Thomas Ellis." The name meant nothing. Until the conductor, who had been passing with fresh coffee, stopped dead. His face turned pale. "Thomas Ellis." Mrs. Ellis looked up. "Yes." The conductor swallowed. "He investigated Daniel Ashcroft's disappearance." The room fell silent. Mercer slowly turned back toward her. "You didn't think that was worth mentioning?" She lowered her eyes. "I didn't think it mattered anymore." Before Mercer could ask another question, the train lights flickered again. Once, twice, then darkness. Complete. Someone gasped. A glass shattered. The emergency lights glowed to life a second later, bathing the carriage in dim red light. It changed everything. Faces looked unfamiliar beneath the crimson glow. Shadows stretched across the walls. The carriage felt smaller, older, as though the train itself had stepped backward through time. Then Mercer noticed something. There weren't 16 reflections in the windows. There were 17. He counted again. Passengers, staff, himself. 16. Yet one extra figure stood motionless near the connecting door. Tall, hands behind his back, wearing a charcoal overcoat. Mercer spun around. No one. He looked back at the glass. The reflection remained, watching him. Slowly, it raised one gloved hand, then pointed toward the luggage rack above compartment 9. The lights returned to normal. The reflection disappeared. Without a word, Mercer hurried into the compartment. He climbed onto the seat and reached the overhead rack. At first, he found only an old blanket. Then his fingers brushed against something hidden behind it. A leather-bound notebook. Dust-covered. Forgotten. Inside the front cover was a faded inscription. Property of Inspector Thomas Ellis, Margaret's late husband. Mercer opened to the final written page. The handwriting became increasingly hurried, as though the author had been running out of time. The last complete sentence read, "I know who took Daniel Ashcroft, but if this notebook is found, it means I was wrong to trust." The sentence ended abruptly. The remainder of the page had been torn away. Mercer stared at the jagged edge. Someone hadn't just removed a page. They had removed the name of the killer. And somewhere on the Blackmoor Express, the missing page was almost certainly still aboard. The notebook changed everything. Nathan Mercer read the unfinished sentence 3 more times, hoping another meaning would reveal itself. It didn't. The final words remained maddeningly incomplete. "I know who took Daniel Ashcroft, but if this notebook is found, it means I was wrong to trust." One missing page. One missing name. 25 years of unanswered questions. He carefully closed the notebook. "If someone removed that page," he said quietly, "they expected this notebook to be found eventually." Margaret Ellis looked at the worn leather cover, her eyes glistening. "I haven't seen that notebook since my husband died." "You knew about it." "He carried it everywhere during the investigation." "And after?" "He refused to talk about the case." She paused. "The last few weeks of his life, he barely slept." Mercer looked up. "You said he investigated Daniel Ashcroft. He became obsessed with the disappearance. What happened to him?" Margaret's fingers tightened around her teacup. "They ruled it a heart attack." She looked away. "I never believed them." The train was moving again. Whatever had triggered the emergency stop had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. Outside, the landscape had changed. The open moor had given way to dense pine forest. Branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. No houses. No roads. No signs of civilization. Only darkness. Mercer checked his watch. 3:07 a.m. According to the timetable, Blackmoor Station should have been less than 40 minutes away. He gathered the railway staff in the service compartment. "I need access to your passenger records." The conductor frowned. "They're digital now." "Show me." Within minutes, they were studying the electronic manifest on the conductor's handheld terminal. Every ticket sold that evening appeared on the screen. Oliver Kent, Margaret Ellis, Richard Hale, Emily Foster, James Porter. 11 passengers. 3 members of staff. Mercer's own name. Nothing unusual. Until the screen refreshed. A new entry appeared. ASH0FT Daniel. Seat 9A. Checked in 02:11. Mercer stared. No one entered this train at 2:11. The conductor's voice shook. "That's impossible." Mercer refreshed the screen himself. The name remained. He opened the booking details. The ticket had been purchased online. Time of purchase: 11:43 p.m. Just 15 minutes before departure. Payment method: unknown. Address: unknown. Contact information: blank. Every required field was empty. Yet somehow, the railway system had accepted the booking. Mercer frowned. Can someone access your booking system remotely? The conductor nodded. Head office could. What about hackers? I wouldn't know. Mercer wasn't convinced. Someone had wanted Daniel Ashcroft's name to appear on this train tonight. The question was why. As he returned to the passenger carriage, Oliver hurried towards him. I found something. What is it? My bag. What about it? It isn't mine. Mercer followed him to compartment 5. An identical black backpack sat beneath Oliver's seat. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about it, until Oliver produced his own bag from the overhead rack. 2 bags. Same make. Same color. Same size. Someone had switched them. Mercer unzipped the unfamiliar backpack. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a shaving kit, a paperback novel. Nothing suspicious. Then he discovered a false bottom. Beneath it rested a small metal cash box. Locked. Heavy. No markings. Mercer shook it gently. Something metallic rattled inside. The conductor fetched a toolkit. After a few minutes, the lock gave way. Inside the box were 3 items: a brass pocket watch, a folded newspaper dated 14 April 2001, and an old Polaroid photograph. Mercer picked up the photograph first. It showed 4 people standing on the platform at Blackmoor station. The image had faded with age, but the faces remained recognizable. Daniel Ashcroft, Thomas Ellis, a young railway conductor, and Mercer's breath caught. The 4th man wore a charcoal overcoat, black gloves, the same man Mercer had seen in the dining carriage. Exactly the same. Not younger, not older. Exactly the same. Richard Hale looked over Mercer's shoulder. Who's that? I was hoping you'd tell me. I've never seen him before. Mercer held the photograph closer to the light. There could be no mistake. The stranger hadn't simply resembled the man from earlier. He was identical. Not a wrinkle different. Not a hair out of place. If the photograph truly dated back 25 years, then the impossible had just become undeniable. Mercer turned over the photograph. Something had been written on the back, in faded blue ink. Don't let him reach Blackmoor. No signature. The newspaper proved equally unsettling. Most of the headlines concerned local politics. One article had been circled repeatedly in red ink. Local historian DISCOVRS, BLACKMOOR tunnel records. Mercer skimmed the report. Construction workers building the Blackmoor Tunnel in 1884 had reported repeated accidents. 9 men died during excavation. One foreman claimed workers kept seeing an extra passenger walking through unfinished sections of tunnel before each fatal accident. Railway officials dismissed the stories as superstition. Construction continued. Mercer folded the paper. Coincidence? Nothing more. Yet whoever had hidden the newspaper clearly believed it mattered. The train entered another tunnel. Unlike the long Blackridge Tunnel, this one lasted barely 30 seconds. Still, the lights dimmed. Every passenger instinctively looked toward the windows. Again they became mirrors. Mercer counted the reflections. 16. Then 17. The stranger stood at the rear of the carriage once more. This time he wasn't alone. A second figure stood beside him. A young man in a flat cap, holding a leather briefcase. Mercer recognized him instantly. Daniel Ashcroft. The two men stared directly at him. Neither moved. Neither blinked. The train emerged into moonlight. The reflections vanished. Mercer spun around. The rear of the carriage was empty. But something now rested on the seat, where no one had been sitting moments earlier. A folded railway timetable. It hadn't been there before. He picked it up. Every page was blank. Except one. Someone had drawn a single line in black ink. It led from London to Blackmoor, then continued beyond the final station, beyond the end of the railway, into an area of the map where no track had ever existed. At the end of the line, someone had written two words. Next stop. Mercer stared at the altered timetable. The railway line ended at Blackmoor. It always had. Yet the hand-drawn extension continued another 3 miles beyond the station, disappearing into a section of moorland marked on no official map. Whoever had drawn it had done so with confidence, following gentle curves and gradients as though copying a route that genuinely existed. "There are no tracks beyond Blackmoor," the conductor said. Mercer handed him the timetable. "Then explain this." The conductor studied it for several seconds before shaking his head. "I can't." "Have you ever heard rumors of another line?" The man hesitated. "My grandfather worked these railways. And he used to mention an abandoned military siding somewhere beyond the station." "Did it exist?" "I thought it was just one of his stories." Mercer folded the timetable and slipped it into his satchel. Nothing about this journey felt accidental anymore. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to leave clues. The question was whether they were leading him toward the truth, or carefully away from it. The train slowed unexpectedly. No announcement came over the intercom. No station lights appeared ahead. Instead, the brakes eased just enough for the Blackmoor Express to crawl through the forest. Mercer looked outside. The trees stood impossibly close to the tracks now, their branches brushing the windows. The driver wasn't reducing speed because of the timetable. He was looking for something, or trying not to hit it. A sharp knock echoed through the train. Not from outside this time. From the luggage compartment. Everyone heard it. One knock. Then another. Metal against metal. Mercer exchanged a glance with the conductor. "No one's back there," the conductor whispered. "Let's keep it that way until we know." He motioned for the railway guard to accompany him. The three men made their way toward the rear baggage carriage. The knocking had stopped. The only sound was the low hum of the train and the rattle of loose chains hanging from the ceiling. Mercer unlocked the sliding door. The smell hit him first. Not decay. Wet earth. Fresh soil. As though someone had carried the outdoors inside. The luggage compartment was dimly lit. Suitcases were secured in rows of metal racks. Nothing appeared disturbed. Then Mercer noticed muddy footprints crossing the wooden floor. Just one set. They began at the rear emergency door. They ended beside an old steamer trunk. No return prints. He crouched. The mud was still damp. Whoever had left them had done so recently. Very recently. The conductor whispered, "That's impossible." Mercer ignored him. He unlatched the trunk. Inside lay neatly folded blankets. Beneath them, a body. The young railway guard stumbled backwards. The conductor gripped a luggage rack to steady himself. Mercer remained perfectly still. Years of experience had taught him that panic only blurred observation. The victim was a man in his early 30s. Dark hair, gray suit, no visible injuries. His hands rested peacefully across his chest, as though someone had arranged them after death. There was no blood, no obvious signs of violence. Most unsettling of all, his face looked strangely familiar. Mercer realized why a moment later. He had seen this man before. Not in person. In the Polaroid photograph. Daniel Ashcroft. Or someone who looked exactly like him. The conductor's voice barely rose above a whisper. It can't be. Mercer checked for a pulse. Nothing. The skin was cold. But not cold enough. He estimated the man had died within the last hour. Which was impossible. The victim from the 2001 disappearance couldn't have died 60 minutes ago. Mercer searched the pockets. No wallet. No phone. No identification. Only a silver key engraved with the number 17. Back in the passenger carriage, Mercer decided not to announce the discovery immediately. Panic would spread faster than facts. Instead, he quietly asked each passenger to remain seated while he examined the body. Margaret Ellis approached despite his instructions. The moment she saw the man's face, all color drained from hers. "Oh!" She covered her mouth. "I know him." Mercer looked up. "Who is he?" "I don't." She frowned. "I knew him." "Mrs. Ellis. My husband showed me his photograph." She stepped closer. "That's Daniel Ashcroft." "You sound certain." "I am." Mercer studied the body again. "Then either history has rewritten itself." He paused. "Or someone wants us to believe it has." Oliver appeared in the doorway. "Inspector." "What is it?" "I think someone searched my compartment." "Why?" "My notebook's gone." "What notebook?" "The one I use for university." Mercer frowned. "Was there anything important in it?" "No." Oliver hesitated. "Well, not until tonight." "What do you mean?" "I started writing down everything that happened." Mercer's expression hardened. "So someone stole your notes?" Oliver nodded. "I only left the compartment for 2 minutes. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Someone on the train was actively removing evidence." Mercer gathered the passengers once more. "This train contains a dead man." Gasps filled the carriage. He continued before anyone could interrupt. "Until we reach Blackmoor, no one is to leave another passenger's sight." Richard Hale folded his arms. "You're saying the killer is still here?" "I'm saying someone had access to the luggage compartment." "But the doors are locked." "Exactly." The businessman frowned. "So one of the railway staff." "I'm accusing no one." "Not yet." Mercer asked everyone to empty their pockets onto the dining tables. Keys, wallets, tickets, phones. Nothing unusual. Until the conductor reached into his jacket. His hand froze. Slowly, he withdrew a folded sheet of paper. His face turned white. "I've never seen this before." Mercer took it. It wasn't folded. It had been carefully creased into the exact shape of the conductor's pocket, as if someone had placed it there while he was wearing the jacket. He unfolded it. It was the missing page from Thomas Ellis's notebook. The torn edge matched perfectly. The room fell silent as Mercer read the final lines aloud. "I know who took Daniel Ashcroft. The truth is simpler than anyone believes. Daniel was never the intended victim. If you're reading this, don't trust the railway records. They've already changed them once." The page ended there. The killer's name was nowhere to be found. Instead, in fresh ink that hadn't been on the original page, someone had added a new sentence. The handwriting was different, sharper, more deliberate. It hadn't been written 25 years ago. It had been written tonight. "You're looking for a murderer. You should be looking for the second body." Mercer felt the blood drain from his face. He slowly looked back toward the luggage compartment. The body they'd found might not be the only one aboard the Blackmoor Express. The words lingered in the silence. "You're looking for a murderer. You should be looking for the second body." Nathan Mercer read the sentence twice before folding the page back into the notebook. Fresh ink, fresh paper fibers where the page had torn decades earlier. Someone had handled it recently. Someone aboard the train. He looked around the dining carriage. Every passenger avoided his gaze. Fear had changed the atmosphere completely. People no longer sat together. They had instinctively separated, each person creating a small island of safety around themselves. Exactly what the killer would want. "We're searching the entire train." Richard Hale sighed. "You've already done that." "Not thoroughly enough." Mercer divided everyone into pairs. "No one moves alone." "What if someone refuses?" Hale asked. Mercer met his eyes. "Then they'll become my first suspect." Nobody argued after that. The Blackmoor Express consisted of 7 passenger coaches, 1 dining carriage, 1 luggage van, and the locomotive. Every compartment, every lavatory, every maintenance cupboard, every luggage rack. Mercer searched them all. Nothing. No hidden passengers. No secret compartments. No second body. By the time they reached the final carriage, frustration was beginning to replace confidence. Perhaps the note had been another distraction. Then Oliver called out, "Inspector!" Mercer hurried towards him. Oliver stood beside the emergency exit at the rear of carriage 3. The floor. Mercer knelt. One of the wooden floorboards sat slightly higher than the rest. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for a detective. He produced a screwdriver from the railway toolkit and carefully lifted the board. Beneath it lay a narrow cavity between the carriage floor and the chassis. Inside, a leather wallet. Mercer opened it. The driving license belonged to a man named Edward Sinclair. Age 47. Address Blackmoor. The photograph matched no one currently aboard the train. Inside the wallet was a faded family picture. A wife, 2 daughters, and Edward Sinclair smiling awkwardly at the camera. The license had expired 24 years earlier. Mercer frowned. "Conductor." "Yes." "Have you heard that name before?" The man's expression changed immediately. "Edward Sinclair. You know him." He was the station master at Blackmoor. "What happened to him?" "He disappeared." Mercer looked up slowly. "When?" The conductor swallowed. "The same night Daniel Ashcroft vanished. 2 disappearances. 1 train. 1 night. No bodies. Until now." Mercer slipped the wallet into an evidence bag. "If Sinclair vanished too." His sentence trailed off. Someone had hidden the wallet beneath the floorboards. Not dropped it. Hidden it. Deliberately. As they continued searching, Margaret Ellis approached quietly. "Inspector, what is it?" "I've remembered something." Mercer turned to face her. "My husband came home one evening after interviewing the station master's wife. And he said something I didn't understand." "What did he say?" Margaret closed her eyes. "You can't solve a disappearance until you know who wanted to be found." Mercer repeated the words silently. "Who wanted to be found, not who wanted to disappear." The distinction mattered. The train emerged from the forest. Ahead, the moon illuminated broad stretches of open moorland. Far in the distance stood the dark outline of Blackmoor itself. A church spire, a water tower, rows of silent buildings. The conductor checked his watch. 15 minutes. Mercer looked out of the window. "So whatever happens, it happens soon." The radio suddenly crackled. Everyone froze. Static. Then a voice. "Weak. Broken. Can anyone hear me?" The conductor snatched up the handset. "This is Blackmoor Express. Go ahead." Silence. Then, "You don't stop." Mercer leaned closer. "Who's speaking?" Static swallowed the reply. "And he's still." More interference. "On the train." The signal died. "Can you trace it?" Mercer asked. The conductor shook his head. "No." "Where did it come from?" "I don't know." "It sounded close." "It shouldn't." "Why?" "That frequency only connects to Blackmoor Station." Mercer frowned. "We're still miles away. And the station radio hasn't worked for nearly 10 years. Before anyone could speak, the lights failed again. Not a flicker. Total darkness. The train continued moving. Somewhere in the blackness, someone began running. Footsteps thundered through the corridor. Mercer grabbed his torch. Its beam cut through the darkness, just in time to catch a figure disappearing around the bend. "Stop." The figure didn't. Mercer sprinted after them. The narrow corridor forced him into single file. The runner was fast. Too fast. They reached the connection between two carriages. The door slammed shut. Mercer threw it open. Empty. No one. Just the swaying gangway between coaches. He swept the torch around. Nothing. Then he noticed the exterior door. Open. Cold air rushed through the gap. Impossible. At 60 miles an hour, no one could survive climbing outside. Yet someone had opened it. On the threshold sat a small brass object. Mercer picked it up. Another pocket watch. This one had stopped permanently. The hands pointed to 2:11. Exactly the time Daniel Ashcroft's ticket had appeared in the railway system. When the lights returned, Mercer gathered everyone again. One face was missing. Richard Hale. The businessman. Where is he? Nobody answered. Oliver looked around nervously. He was right behind me. The conductor counted. He's gone. Mercer ran through every carriage. No Richard. The luggage compartment. Empty except for the unidentified body. The dining car. Empty. The lavatories. Empty. It was happening again. A passenger had disappeared from a moving train. Just as Daniel Ashcroft had. Just as Edward Sinclair had. Mercer stopped in the center of carriage 4. His eyes drifted to compartment 9. The door stood slightly open. Inside, the seat by the window was occupied. Richard Hale sat perfectly still, staring out into the darkness. Mercer rushed inside. Richard. No response. He placed a hand on the businessman's shoulder. The body tipped sideways onto the seat. Richard Hale was dead. There wasn't a mark on him. His eyes were open, frozen in shock. Clutched tightly in his right hand was a railway ticket. Not his own. It bore a single name. Nathan Mercer. Richard Hale's fingers were rigid. Nathan Mercer carefully prized the ticket from the dead man's hand. It was warm. Not from Richard. From the paper itself. As though it had only just emerged from the ticket machine. The conductor leaned over Mercer's shoulder. It wasn't there. What? When we found him, his hands were empty. Mercer looked up sharply. You're certain? I checked for a pulse. And now he's holding a ticket. The conductor nodded. I swear to you. Mercer studied it. The heavy cream card carried the familiar railway crest embossed in gold. Passenger Nathan Mercer. Departure London King's Cross. Destination Blackmoor. Seat 9A. Time issued 2:11 a.m. The same time. The same seat. The same details as Daniel Ashcroft's ticket. Only the name had changed. Mercer slipped the ticket into an evidence envelope. Richard Hale had no visible injuries. No bruising around the neck. No signs of poison. Nothing. Dr. Emily Foster, the nurse who had introduced herself earlier in the journey, knelt beside the body. I'm not a pathologist, she said, but he looks. She stopped. Go on. Terrified. Mercer looked closer. Richard's expression wasn't peaceful. His eyes were fixed on something beyond the compartment window. Something he'd seen in the final moments of his life. Mercer slowly turned to look outside. Only darkness. His own reflection stared back at him. Then, for the briefest instant, a second face appeared beside his. The man in the charcoal overcoat. Mercer spun around. The compartment was empty except for the passengers. When he looked back, the reflection was gone. The driver announced they were 10 minutes from Blackmoor. No one relaxed. If anything, the tension deepened. The train felt like a trap slowly closing. Mercer returned to the dining carriage and spread every piece of evidence across one table. The anonymous letter. The altered timetable. Thomas Ellis's notebook. The missing page. Daniel Ashcroft's ticket. His own ticket. Edward Sinclair's wallet. The Polaroid photograph. 2 pocket watches. The newspaper clipping. Each item had been left to be found. Not hidden forever. Discovered at precisely the right moment. Someone wasn't simply committing murders. They were constructing a story. Mercer picked up the Polaroid again. This time he ignored the people. Instead, he studied the background. Blackmoor Station looked different 25 years earlier. A second platform. A water crane. An old signal box. Then he noticed something almost hidden by the edge of the photograph. A sign. Only half visible. He reached for a magnifying glass from the railway emergency kit. The sign read, Platform 2, Blackmoor Mineral Line. His pulse quickened. There was another railway. The conductor stared. I've never heard of the mineral line. No, Mercer replied quietly. But someone wanted it forgotten. Margaret Ellis joined him. My husband mentioned a second platform once. You never told me. I didn't remember until now. What did he say? Only that it had been closed after an accident. What accident? He wouldn't tell me. Mercer looked back at the photograph. The hand-drawn extension on the timetable. The abandoned line. It all pointed in the same direction. Blackmoor had once been larger than anyone admitted. Oliver hurried into the carriage carrying his laptop. "I think I've found something. I thought there wasn't any internet." "There isn't." "So, I wasn't looking online." He turned the screen towards Mercer. "I've been checking the metadata from the photograph Richard Hale took before boarding." Mercer frowned. "The one with the man in the overcoat?" Oliver nodded. "I enhanced it." The image appeared on screen. The stranger stood exactly where Mercer remembered, hands in his pockets, watching the train. Oliver zoomed further, then further still, until another figure became visible in the background. A railway worker pushing a luggage trolley. Mercer recognized him instantly. "The conductor. You were on the platform." The conductor nodded. "Of course. But look." Oliver enlarged the image one final time. The conductor walked straight through the place where the stranger stood. Not around him. Through him. As though the man wasn't physically there. Silence filled the carriage. Finally, the conductor whispered, "I never saw him." Mercer leaned back. That changed everything. The stranger wasn't selecting who saw him. People remembered him differently. Some saw his face. Some couldn't. Some spoke to him. Others walked through the space he occupied without noticing anyone at all. It wasn't random. There had to be a pattern. Patterns solved murders. He turned to the notebook again. Thomas Ellis had written dozens of observations. Mercer read each one carefully. Then one sentence caught his eye. Written halfway through the investigation. "He only appears to those searching for him." Mercer's eyes widened. Not everyone had seen the stranger. Only the people asking questions. Mercer, Thomas Ellis, Daniel Ashcroft, perhaps Richard Hale. The stranger wasn't haunting the train. He was leading investigators. But toward what? The train whistle sounded. Long. Low. The conductor glanced through the front window. "We're approaching Blackmoor." Mercer stood. "How long?" 5 minutes. Before anyone could move, the emergency radio crackled once more. This time the signal was crystal clear. No static. No interference. Just one calm male voice. "Inspector Mercer." Mercer's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "You've done well. Identify yourself. You found almost everything." Mercer gripped the handset tighter. "Where are you?" A brief pause. Then the voice replied, "I'm waiting for you." "Where?" "Platform 2." Mercer looked at the conductor. The old railwayman slowly shook his head. "There is no Platform 2." The voice spoke one final sentence before the transmission ended. "You'll find it. If you're willing to leave the train." The radio fell silent. At that exact moment, the Blackmoor Express rounded a gentle bend. The town emerged from the darkness. Blackmoor Station stood ahead, bathed in pale yellow lamplight. One platform was crowded with waiting police officers. But as Mercer looked beyond it, through drifting fog, he saw something impossible. Running parallel to the main line was another platform. Older. Overgrown. Its lamps glowed with a warm amber light. A station clock showed 2:11 a.m. And standing beneath it, perfectly still, was the man in the charcoal overcoat. He slowly removed one black glove, raised his hand, and beckoned Mercer to follow him. The train should not have been slowing. According to the timetable, the Blackmoor Express was due to arrive at Platform 1 in less than a minute. The police waiting there had already noticed the approaching headlights. Several officers stepped forward, preparing to board the train the moment it stopped. Yet Nathan Mercer wasn't watching them. His eyes remained fixed on the forgotten platform, running alongside the station. Platform 2. It shouldn't have existed. Its stonework was stained with age. Iron benches sat beneath ornate gas lamps that cast a warm, amber glow instead of the harsh white light illuminating the modern station. Hanging flower baskets, long since dead, swayed gently despite the still night. And there were people. Dozens of them. Men in flat caps. Women wearing long wool coats. A porter pushing a brass luggage trolley. A station master in an old-fashioned uniform. None of them moved. They stood perfectly still, like figures in an old photograph. Only one man acknowledged Mercer. The stranger in the charcoal overcoat. He lowered his raised hand, turned, and began walking slowly toward the station building. Then he disappeared into the mist. The train continued rolling. Mercer blinked. Platform 2 vanished. Only Platform 1 remained. What did you see? Margaret Ellis had come to stand beside him. You saw it too. She nodded. I haven't seen it for 25 years. Mercer turned. You've seen it before. Only once. When? The morning my husband came home, after Daniel Ashcroft disappeared. She looked out at the station. He said the railway had buried more than one secret. The brakes hissed. With a final shudder, the Blackmoor Express came to a stop. Police officers hurried toward the doors before they had fully opened. Leading them was Chief Inspector Alan Whitby, a tall man with silver hair and the measured confidence of someone who had spent decades in uniform. Nathan. Mercer recognized him immediately. They had worked together years earlier. Whitby looked relieved. We lost contact with the train. So did we. Whitby's expression changed as he noticed the passengers' faces. What happened? Mercer answered simply. 2 dead. And a disappearance connected to a 25-year-old cold case. Whitby frowned. I think you'd better start at the beginning. Within half an hour, the station waiting room had become a temporary incident room. Uniformed officers escorted passengers, one by one, into separate rooms for statements. The luggage compartment had been sealed. A forensic photographer documented Richard Hale's body. Another team examined the unidentified man they believed to be Daniel Ashcroft. Mercer sat opposite Whitby. He placed every piece of evidence on the table. Whitby listened without interrupting. When Mercer finished, the older detective leaned back. You've had a difficult journey. I'm not imagining this. I didn't say you were. But you think fatigue explains some of it. Whitby smiled faintly. I think people see strange things after traumatic events. What about the booking records? We'll examine them. The photograph. We'll authenticate it. The second platform. Whitby paused. There has only ever been one platform at Blackmoor. Mercer said nothing. He had expected that answer. A knock came at the door. A young forensic officer entered carrying a transparent evidence bag. Sir. Whitby looked up. What have you found? This was recovered from Richard Hale's jacket. Mercer frowned. It wasn't there earlier. No, sir. Inside the bag lay a brass key. The number 17 had been engraved into it. Mercer's pulse quickened. The first body had an identical key. Whitby looked between them. Identical. Mercer nodded. Same engraving. The forensic officer swallowed. There wasn't just one key. He reached into his pocket. There were two. He produced a second evidence bag. Inside was another brass key, also marked 17. The room fell silent. "What opens with key 17?" Mercer asked. No one answered. Whitby turned to the station master. "Does this station have numbered lockers?" "No." "Signal cabinets?" "No." "Storage rooms?" The station master hesitated. "There used to be." Mercer leaned forward. "Used to?" "The old luggage lockers." "What happened to them?" "They were removed years ago." "What numbers?" "I don't remember." Mercer stood. "I think you do." The station master lowered his eyes. 17 was never removed. 5 minutes later, they were walking through the oldest part of Blackmoor Station. Most of the original building had been closed for decades. Paint peeled from the walls. Dust covered abandoned ticket windows. Broken clocks still hung where passengers had once checked departure times. Finally, they reached a narrow corridor ending in a row of iron luggage lockers. Numbers 1 through 16 stood open. Number 18 had rusted shut. Between them, locker 17, untouched. Its paint was newer than every other locker. Someone had maintained it. Mercer inserted one of the brass keys. It turned smoothly. The heavy door swung open. Inside sat a leather satchel. Nothing else. Mercer lifted it onto the floor. The leather had cracked with age. Embossed on the flap were the initials. D.A. Daniel Ashcroft. Inside were neatly arranged documents. A notebook, several letters, a cassette recorder, and a reel of undeveloped film. Whitby picked up the notebook. The handwriting matches the railway records. Mercer opened the first letter. It had never been posted. It was addressed to Inspector Thomas Ellis. He unfolded it carefully. The first line read, "If anything happens to me before I reach Blackmoor, it won't be an accident." Mercer looked up. Daniel Ashcroft had expected to die. Or disappear. The second paragraph made his blood run cold. "I finally know why Edward Sinclair wanted me on the last train." Whitby interrupted. "Edward Sinclair, the missing station master." Mercer continued reading. His expression slowly changed from concentration to disbelief. Margaret noticed first. "What is it?" Mercer lowered the letter. Edward Sinclair wasn't Daniel Ashcroft's enemy. Whitby frowned. Then who was? Mercer turned the page. The final sentence answered the question. Not with a name. With a title. The man responsible isn't a passenger. He never leaves the railway. At that exact moment, every light inside Blackmoor Station went out. The building fell into darkness. From somewhere deep within the abandoned station came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, measured, walking toward locker 17. One pair of footsteps, then another, as if several people were approaching together. Mercer reached for his torch. The beam swept across the corridor. At the far end stood a railway employee in a neatly pressed vintage uniform. His brass name badge caught the light. It read, Edward Sinclair. He looked exactly as he had in the 25-year-old photograph. Without a word, he raised one finger to his lips. Then quietly said, "You're asking the wrong question." And the lights came back on. The corridor was empty. The corridor remained silent. Nathan Mercer lowered his torch, but his heartbeat refused to slow. He had seen Edward Sinclair as clearly as he had seen anyone else that night. The brass buttons on the station master's uniform had caught the light. There had been a faint smear of grease on one sleeve, as though he had been working on machinery. Even the badge had been worn smooth around the edges from years of use. Then he had vanished. Chief Inspector Whitby looked at Mercer. "What happened? You didn't see him." Whitby frowned. "See who?" Mercer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked towards Margaret Ellis. She was staring at the exact place where the station master had stood. "You saw him." Margaret nodded slowly. "Edward Sinclair." Whitby sighed. "Nathan." "No." Mercer's voice was calm. "There are only two possibilities." Whitby folded his arms. "I'm listening. Either two people have suffered the same hallucination, or someone else was standing in this corridor." Whitby said nothing. He had learned long ago that Mercer didn't jump to conclusions. If Mercer believed he'd seen someone, there was a reason. The satchel was carried into the station master's old office. Dust covered every surface. A railway map from the early 1980s still hung on one wall. Mercer spread Daniel Ashcroft's papers across the desk. There were dozens of pages. Receipts, handwritten notes, sketches, old newspaper cuttings. Most appeared unrelated, until he found a folded blueprint. He carefully unfolded it. It was a map of Blackmoor Station. Not the modern station. The original. Mercer immediately noticed something strange. Platform 1. Platform 2. The signal box. The waiting room. Everything matched the station outside, except for one feature. Beneath Platform 2. A tunnel. Whitby leaned closer. "What is that?" Mercer traced the line with his finger. "It runs beneath the station." "Maintenance access." "I don't think so." The tunnel ended beneath a building marked only with a single word. "Archive." Margaret frowned. "There isn't an archive." "There isn't one now." Mercer looked back at the blueprint. "But there was." Oliver entered carrying the reel of undeveloped film. "The forensic team found something." He handed Mercer several freshly scanned photographs. The first showed Platform 2 crowded with railway workers. The second showed Edward Sinclair standing beside Daniel Ashcroft. The third. Mercer stopped breathing for a moment. It showed the stranger in the charcoal overcoat. Not in the background. Standing directly between Sinclair and Ashcroft. His face was perfectly clear. Mercer stared at it. Strong jaw. Dark hair. Gray eyes. Nothing unusual. Nothing frightening. Just an ordinary man. Whitby looked at the photograph. "I don't know him." Neither did anyone else. Mercer turned the picture over. Written neatly on the back were 4 words. "Find the ticket inspector." The ticket inspector. Oliver looked puzzled. "The conductor." "No." Mercer shook his head. "Conductors stay on the train." Whitby understood first. There was another member of staff. Mercer nodded. "Someone who checked tickets between stations." Whitby called through the office door. "Find personnel records from April 2001. Within minutes, an officer returned carrying a dusty archive ledger. He opened it. Blackmoor Express. 14 April 2001. Driver. Fireman. Conductor. Dining steward. Porter. Ticket inspector. The final name had been crossed out with thick black ink. Not struck through once. Repeatedly. as if someone had wanted to make it impossible to read. Mercer angled the page beneath the light. Enough of the original ink remained visible. He could make out only the initials. J.M. "Can we recover it?" Whitby asked. The officer nodded. "Forensics might." Mercer closed the ledger. Not quickly enough. Margaret had wandered to the window. She looked out over the empty station. "Nathan." He joined her. "What is it?" She pointed. There, near the far end of the platform, stood a railway lamp. Its flame flickered gently in the breeze. Every other lamp burned white. This one glowed amber, the same color Mercer had seen on platform 2. "It wasn't lit before," Margaret whispered. Mercer looked more closely. Someone stood beside it. The man in the charcoal overcoat. He wasn't beckoning this time. He simply waited. Patiently. Almost sadly. Then he turned and walked towards the abandoned freight yard beyond the station. Mercer made his decision. "I'm following him." Whitby grabbed his arm. "You're chasing someone only half the people here can see. I'm chasing the only person who's led us to evidence all night." Whitby hesitated. He hated the logic, but it was still logic. "I'll come with you." The freight yard had been abandoned for years. Rusting wagons stood beneath collapsing roofs. Weeds pushed through cracked concrete. The amber lamp cast just enough light to reveal a narrow path leading between the buildings. Mercer followed it. The stranger remained, perhaps 50 meters ahead. Never running. Never looking back. Always just visible enough to follow. He led them to a brick warehouse at the edge of the yard. Its heavy wooden doors stood slightly open. Mercer pushed them wider. Inside was darkness. His torch beam swept slowly across the interior. Empty shelves. Broken crates. Old railway equipment. Nothing else. Whitby frowned. "There's no one here." Mercer wasn't listening. He had noticed something. Fresh footprints in the dust. Not one pair. Several. Some recent. Some decades old. All led towards the rear wall. None came back. Mercer examined the bricks. One section sounded hollow. He searched until his fingers found a concealed iron lever hidden beneath a loose stone. With a loud mechanical groan, part of the wall slid sideways. A staircase descended into darkness. Cold air drifted upward. It carried the smell of damp stone and engine oil. Mercer shone his torch down the steps. At the bottom, stretching into the darkness, lay railway tracks. Not abandoned tracks. Polished steel. Recently used. He looked at Whitby. There was another railway. Whitby stared into the darkness. "But where does it go?" Before Mercer could answer, they both heard it. Far below. Deep beneath Blackmoor. The unmistakable whistle of a steam locomotive, followed by the slow, rhythmic sound of a train beginning to move. A train that, according to every official map ever printed, did not exist. The whistle echoed through the darkness. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound carried with it a weight that made every person at the top of the staircase fall silent. Chief Inspector Whitby was the first to speak. "That can't be a locomotive." Mercer didn't take his eyes off the tunnel. "Why not?" "Because there are no active lines beneath Blackmoor." Mercer shone his torch down the staircase again. The beam disappeared long before it reached the bottom. The darkness seemed to absorb the light rather than reveal anything. Then faintly, another sound. Steel wheels turning. Slowly. Deliberately. Not approaching. Waiting. Whitby turned to the officers behind him. I need floodlights down here. One of the constables hurried back towards the station. Another radioed for additional units. Mercer stepped onto the staircase. Nathan. Whitby's voice carried a warning. We wait. For what? Back up. If someone's alive down there, every minute matters. And if someone wants you down there. Mercer smiled faintly. Then they've had 25 years to prepare. Without another word, he continued his descent. Whitby muttered something under his breath before following. The staircase ended nearly 60 feet below ground. Mercer's boots touched solid concrete. His torch swept across the chamber. It had once been a railway platform, smaller than the one above. Older. The walls were lined with soot-blackened brick. Dust covered everything except the rails. Those gleamed, freshly polished. Someone had been using them. Recently, an old enamel sign hung crookedly from the ceiling. The paint had chipped away, but the lettering remained legible. BLACKMOR lower terminus. Oliver stared at it. There really was another station. No, Mercer replied quietly. There still is. The platform stretched into darkness. Old wooden benches stood exactly where passengers had once waited. A ticket office window remained intact. Even a timetable still hung beside it. Mercer walked over. The paper had yellowed with age. Only one service appeared. Departure 2:11 a.m. Destination. The destination had been scratched away. Repeatedly. Someone hadn't wanted anyone reading it. Margaret Ellis joined them. She rested a hand against one of the brick pillars. My husband came here. Mercer looked at her. How do you know? She pointed. Carved into the brickwork, almost hidden beneath decades of grime, were two initials. T.A. Thomas Ellis. Below them, much more faintly, someone had added another message. The answers aren't in the station. Mercer read it twice. Then where are they? A beam of light appeared further down the platform. Not a torch. A lantern. Someone was walking towards them. The officers raised their weapons. Mercer lifted a hand. Wait. The figure stepped into the light. Edward Sinclair. The station master. His uniform looked immaculate despite the grease stains Mercer had noticed earlier. He removed his cap politely. You've come further than anyone else. Whitby whispered. He's real. Mercer gave the slightest nod. So it would seem. Sinclair stopped several yards away. You've been following the wrong mystery. Mercer folded his arms. Then explain it. Sinclair looked past him towards the staircase. Not everyone should hear. Whitby stepped forward. You're in no position to make demands. Sinclair smiled sadly. I've been dead for 25 years. Nobody spoke. Even Whitby seemed unsure how to respond. Sinclair continued calmly. The man who died wasn't Edward Sinclair. Mercer's expression changed. What? The station master disappeared. Yes. I was never found. So who are you? Sinclair looked down at the polished rails. I'm what's left. Mercer had interviewed hundreds of suspects over his career. He knew when someone lied. Sinclair wasn't lying. He was answering exactly as he believed. That didn't make the answer true. What happened on the night Daniel Ashcroft disappeared? Sinclair took a long breath. He discovered the ledger. What ledger? The one no one was meant to see. Before Sinclair could continue, a loud metallic clang echoed through the tunnel. Everyone turned. One of the officers shouted. Movement! A figure sprinted across the far end of the platform. Not the man in the overcoat. Someone else, dressed in modern clothes. Mercer reacted instantly. After him, the chase began. The tunnel beyond the platform curved sharply, forcing Mercer to rely on the echo of footsteps. The runner knew the route. Twice Mercer nearly lost him around blind corners. Old maintenance lamps flickered overhead. The air smelled of coal dust and oil. Then the tunnel opened into an enormous underground depot. Mercer stopped dead. Rows of railway carriages stood in complete silence. Dozens of them. Some dated from the Victorian era. Others were much newer. Every carriage was spotless, as though someone had cared for them continuously. In the center of the depot stood a steam locomotive. Its boiler was warm. White steam drifted lazily from its valves. Someone had fired it recently. Very recently. The runner had vanished. But Mercer noticed something else. Every carriage bore a brass plaque. Each plaque carried a date 1889, 1890, 189, 11892, 1893, 1894, 1895. His own year. He walked slowly towards the newest carriage. The door stood open. Inside were empty compartments. Fresh tea sat on one table. Still warm. A newspaper dated that morning lay folded beside it. Someone had been here only minutes earlier. On the seat opposite rested a conductor's punch. Mercer picked it up. Engraved into the handle were the initials. J.M. The same initials from the personnel ledger. At last they had a name, or at least enough to identify the missing ticket inspector. Behind him, Sinclair's voice echoed through the depot. You finally reached the place Daniel Ashcroft never escaped. Mercer turned. Who is J.M.? Sinclair's face darkened. He wasn't the ticket inspector. Mercer frowned. The railway records say he was. Sinclair shook his head. No. He wrote the records. Before Mercer could ask another question, the steam locomotive gave a long, mournful whistle. Its wheels lurched. The engine began to move. Not by itself. A figure climbed into the driver's cab. The man in the charcoal overcoat. For the first time since the journey began, he looked directly at Mercer. Then he pulled the regulator open. The hidden train rolled slowly into the darkness. And attached to the final carriage, Mercer caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. A polished brass nameplate. It read, "The last train to Blackmoor." For one impossible moment, no one moved. The hidden train gathered speed with a steady, rhythmic clatter, its wheels singing against the rails as it disappeared into the darkness beyond the underground depot. Nathan Mercer broke the silence first. After it, he sprinted towards the locomotive. Whitby and two officers followed, but by the time they reached the end of the platform, the last carriage had already vanished into a tunnel that curved sharply to the east. Mercer stopped. There was no sound now. No whistle. No steam. Only silence. It was as if the train had simply ceased to exist. Whitby bent over, catching his breath. You actually expected to catch a moving locomotive? No. Then why run? Mercer kept staring into the tunnel. Because I wanted to know if it was real. And Mercer knelt beside the rails. He touched the polished steel. It was warm. So now we know. Edward Sinclair remained where they had left him. His expression carried neither triumph nor relief. Only exhaustion. You've seen enough, he said quietly. Not nearly enough, Mercer replied. Then ask the right question. Mercer turned to face him. You said Daniel Ashcroft found a ledger. Yes. What was in it? Sinclair looked towards the abandoned station platform. Every passenger. Mercer frowned. Passenger records. No. The real ones. Without another word, Sinclair led them through the depot. At the far end stood a heavy iron door marked Archive. The same word Mercer had seen on the century-old blueprint. Sinclair produced a brass key from his pocket. Number 17. He unlocked the door. The room beyond was enormous. Shelves stretched into darkness. Thousands of leather-bound ledgers filled them from floor to ceiling. Each bore a single year embossed in fatting gold, 1884, 1885, 1886. On and on. Every year. Without interruption. Until the present. Mercer slowly realized what he was looking at. This isn't a railway archive. Sinclair nodded. No. What is it? The truth. Mercer selected the ledger marked 2001. Dust rose as he opened it. Every page contained neat handwritten entries. Date. Train. Departure. Arrival. Passenger names. Nothing unusual. Until April 14. The page listed everyone who had boarded the Blackmoor Express. Daniel Ashcroft. Edward Sinclair. Thomas Ellis. The conductor. The driver. Exactly as expected. Then one final entry. Written in different ink. Passenger 17. No name. Just a number. Beside it in the remarks column were 3 words. Never reached Blackmoor. Mercer's pulse quickened. Who was passenger 17? Sinclair's shoulders slumped. That's the question Daniel asked. And he shouldn't have. Mercer turned another page. Then another. Every year contained similar entries. Some pages listed ordinary journeys. Others included a mysterious final passenger. Passenger 17. Passenger 17. Passenger 17. Not every year. Only occasionally. Always on the last train to Blackmoor. Always with the same note. Never reached Blackmoor. Whitby leaned over Mercer's shoulder. How many? Mercer began counting. 9. 12. 17. 23. 31. Dozens. Over nearly a century. The same unexplained entry. Always appearing. Always disappearing. Oliver spoke quietly. These aren't victims. Mercer looked at him. What do you mean? If passenger 17 keeps appearing. He swallowed. It's the same person. Nobody answered. Because everyone had reached the same conclusion. Mercer closed the ledger. Who writes these? Sinclair didn't reply. Instead, he pointed towards the back of the archive. A small office stood behind frosted glass. Its lamp was lit. Someone was inside. Mercer walked slowly towards it. The door stood slightly open. He pushed it gently. Inside sat an elderly man wearing a dark railway uniform. His silver hair was neatly combed. Round spectacles rested low on his nose. He was writing. Not hurriedly. Patiently. As though he had all the time in the world. He didn't look up. I wondered how long it would take. Mercer stepped inside. Who are you? The man finished writing a line before answering. My name. He closed the ledger. Is Jonathan Mercer. Nathan felt the room tilt beneath him. My father was called David Mercer. So you were told. Whitby stared between them. Nathan. The old man finally looked up. His gray eyes were unmistakable. The same eyes Nathan saw every morning in the mirror. Not identical. Older. Weathered. But undeniably his own. You've been looking for a killer, the old man said softly. But this was never a murder mystery. Mercer's voice was barely audible. Then what is it? The old man smiled sadly. It was always a story about inheritance. He slid the open ledger across the desk. The final entry had already been written. Passenger 17. Name: Nathan Mercer. Status: arrived. Mercer stared at the page, then at the old man. Outside the office, somewhere in the darkness of the underground railway, the whistle of the last train to Blackmoor echoed once more. This time, it sounded like a departure signal. Nathan Mercer did not look away from the ledger. His own name stared back at him in neat, deliberate handwriting. Passenger 17. Nathan Mercer. Status: arrived. For several seconds, the room was silent except for the ticking of an old railway clock mounted above the office door. Whitby stepped forward. This is some kind of trick. The elderly man smiled politely. I wish it were. Whitby placed a hand on the ledger. When was this written? This morning. By you. Of course. You expected him. I've expected him for a very long time. Mercer finally spoke. Who are you? The old man folded his hands. I told you. No. Mercer's voice hardened. You gave me a name. I asked who you are. The old man regarded him for a moment before nodding. That's a better question. He rose from the desk with surprising ease. The office was lined with photographs spanning more than a century. Everyone showed railway staff standing proudly beside locomotives. Drivers, signalmen, porters, conductors, station masters. The old man pointed to the oldest photograph. Dated 1884. Construction of the Blackmoor line. Mercer studied the faces. One of the workers stood slightly apart from the others. Dark overcoat, black gloves. The same man who had appeared throughout the night. He looked exactly as he had on the train. Not a day older. Who is he? Mercer asked. The old man looked at the photograph with quiet respect. His name was Elias Rowe. What happened to him? He died before the railway ever opened. Whitby frowned. Then how is he in later photographs? The old man gave a tired smile. That's why no one believed Edward Sinclair. Mercer moved from photograph to photograph, 190, 1190, 1903, 1904, 1905. Every few decades, there he was again. Elias Rowe. Never changing. Always standing a little apart from everyone else. Watching. Waiting. Yet Mercer noticed something even stranger. The people around Rowe changed. But one face kept returning. The elderly man standing beside him. Not old in every photograph. Sometimes young. Sometimes middle-aged. Sometimes elderly. Always the same person at different stages of life. The man now standing in front of Mercer. You've worked here your entire life. The old man nodded. And before that, my father. And before him, my grandfather. Mercer understood. The job was inherited. Yes. What job? The old man's expression became solemn. Keeping the railway closed. Whitby laughed quietly. This has gone far enough. He turned to one of the officers. Arrest him. The constable stepped forward. Before he reached the desk, every lamp in the archive went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Someone gasped. A gust of cold air swept through the shelves. The ledgers began falling, one after another. Heavy books crashed onto the floor in every direction. Then, a whistle, not distant. Inside the archive, the lights returned. The constable had disappeared. Everyone froze. His torch lay on the floor where he had been standing, still switched on. Mercer ran to it. No sign of the officer. No struggle. No blood. Nothing. Whitby called his name. Only echoes answered. The old man closed his eyes. It has begun. Mercer rounded on him. What has? The railway has taken another passenger. You know where he is? Not exactly. Then tell me what you do know. The old man looked at the scattered ledgers. For 142 years, the railway has balanced its books. Mercer frowned. What does that mean? When someone arrives who shouldn't. He paused. Someone else leaves who shouldn't. Mercer stared at him. You're saying people vanish to keep some kind of balance. I don't expect you to believe me. I don't. You will. Margaret Ellis had been quietly examining one of the fallen ledgers. Nathan. He crossed to her. She handed him a volume dated 1978. It mentions Thomas. Mercer opened it. There in faded ink was a familiar name. Thomas Ellis. Remarks. Declined the appointment. He turned the page. Another entry. Edward Sinclair. Remarks. Accepted the appointment. Then another. Jonathan Mercer. Remarks. Current keeper. Mercer's breathing slowed. This wasn't random. It was a succession. A role passed from one person to another. Thomas Ellis had refused it. Edward Sinclair had accepted. Now, Jonathan Mercer was old. Very old. The ledger on the desk already bore Nathan's name. You think I'm here to replace you? Jonathan Mercer nodded sadly. I know you are. I refuse. So did Thomas Ellis. What happened? He left. And Jonathan's smile faded. His wife buried him 6 months later. Margaret looked away. The pain on her face answered the rest. A long silence settled over the archive. Finally, Mercer asked the question that had haunted him since boarding the train. What happened to Daniel Ashcroft? Jonathan walked to another shelf. He removed a thin ledger bound in black leather. No year appeared on the cover. Only one title. Passengers Unaccounted For. He opened it. Inside were dozens of names. Daniel Ashcroft. Edward Sinclair. The missing constable. Richard Hale. Others stretching back to the 19th century. Each entry ended the same way. Still traveling. Mercer looked up slowly. What does that mean? Jonathan closed the book. It means... From somewhere deep beneath the archive came the unmistakable sound of carriage doors opening. A station announcement echoed faintly through the tunnels. The last train to Blackmoor is now boarding. Jonathan looked directly into Nathan's eyes. It means they're waiting for the next conductor. The office door slowly swung open on its own. Outside, in the dim light of the underground platform, dozens of silent passengers stood in orderly lines. Among them was Daniel Ashcroft, Edward Sinclair, Richard Hale. the missing police constable. And at the very front, Elias Rowe, the man in the charcoal overcoat. For the first time, he spoke directly to Nathan Mercer. His voice was calm, almost kind. It's time to decide whether the line ends with you or continues forever. Nathan Mercer looked beyond Elias Rowe to the line of waiting passengers. None of them appeared frightened. That disturbed him more than anything he had witnessed since boarding the Blackmoor Express. Daniel Ashcroft stood with his hands folded behind his back, wearing the same gray suit from the faded Polaroid. Richard Hale's tie was still slightly crooked, just as it had been when Mercer found him dead in compartment 9. Even the missing police constable stood calmly among them, his helmet tucked beneath one arm. They were not prisoners. They were waiting. For what? Mercer stepped onto the platform. Whitby reached for his shoulder. Nathan, don't. Mercer stopped. If what we've been told is true, we won't solve this standing here. Whitby looked at the silent crowd. I've spent 35 years dealing with facts. So have I. And this isn't one. Mercer gave a faint smile. That's the problem. Elias Rowe watched him approach. Up close, there was nothing remarkable about the man. His charcoal overcoat was neatly pressed. His black gloves showed signs of wear around the fingertips. His face was kind rather than severe. If Mercer had passed him on a London street, he would never have looked twice. You've been following me all night, Mercer said. Rowe inclined his head. No. You've appeared wherever the evidence was. I appeared where you were ready to see it. Mercer folded his arms. Who are you? I was the first ticket inspector on the Blackmoor line. And now? Rowe glanced down the empty track. Now I make sure no one travels alone. Mercer had expected riddles. Instead, Rowe answered every question plainly. That made him harder to distrust. What happened in 1884? The tunnel collapsed. I read that 9 workers died. Rowe nodded. They did. What has that to do with this railway? The collapse buried more than men. Mercer waited. Rowe continued. It buried the only exit. Jonathan Mercer appeared beside them. You've told him enough. Rowe looked at the elderly keeper. No. I've told him almost enough. The two men regarded one another with the familiarity of old colleagues rather than enemies. Mercer noticed it immediately. You know each other. Jonathan gave a tired laugh. We've known each other longer than either of us wished. Mercer turned to Jonathan. You said the railway must remain open. Yes. Why? Jonathan hesitated for the first time. Because the next answer mattered. If it closes. He looked toward the darkness beyond the platform. Everything that entered it leaves. A silence followed. Then Whitby spoke. What exactly has entered it? Jonathan met his gaze. Everyone who was never meant to disappear. Mercer's mind raced. Daniel Ashcroft. Edward Sinclair. The constable. Richard Hale. All listed as still traveling. Not dead. Not alive. Held somewhere. If the line is destroyed, they return. Isn't that a good thing? Jonathan closed his eyes. They returned to the moment they left. Mercer frowned. What does that mean? It means Daniel Ashcroft vanishes again. And Richard Hale. He dies again. The constable. He disappears before your eyes. Mercer slowly understood. They're trapped. Jonathan nodded. And if they're released, they repeat the journey. Oliver stepped forward, his laptop still clutched under one arm. There has to be another way. Rose smiled gently. There always is. Then why hasn't anyone found it? Because everyone asked how to escape. He looked directly at Mercer. No one asked why the train existed. The question struck Mercer harder than any revelation that night. Every clue, every ledger, every appearance by Rowe, they all pointed toward one mystery. Not the murders, the railway itself. He looked back at the ancient locomotive resting beneath the soot-blackened roof. Its brass fittings gleamed despite the years. Its paintwork had been lovingly maintained. Someone cared for it. Someone needed it. Who built this line? Mercer asked quietly. Rowe answered without hesitation. People. And who keeps it running? Rowe looked at the waiting passengers. They do. Mercer walked slowly towards the locomotive. Something had bothered him since the hidden depot. Every carriage bore a year 1889, 1890, 189, 11892, 1893, 1894. He climbed into the nearest carriage. Unlike the others, this one was full. Not with people. With luggage. Hundreds of suitcases. Leather trunks. Hat boxes. Briefcases. Each carefully labeled. He picked up the nearest tag. Daniel Ashcroft. Departure. London. Destination. Blackmoor. Never collected. He moved to another. Edward Sinclair. Another. Richard Hale. Every passenger who had disappeared had left something behind. Not on the train above. Here, Mercer suddenly realized what he was looking at. This isn't a passenger train. Rowe nodded. No, it's a lost property office. For the first time that night, Rowe smiled broadly. Exactly. Everyone stared at Mercer. He continued thinking aloud. A railway keeps records. He looked around the carriage. It keeps luggage. It keeps tickets. It keeps timetables. He turned back to Jonathan. And someone has mistaken keeping things for keeping people. Jonathan's face changed. Only slightly. But Mercer saw it. The old keeper looked afraid. Not of Mercer. Of the idea. Mercer stepped closer. You inherited the job. Yes. But somewhere along the way. He glanced at the endless shelves of ledgers. The purpose was forgotten. Jonathan whispered. No. Mercer wasn't finished. Elias never wanted passengers trapped. Rowe remained silent. He stayed because someone had to guide the lost. Jonathan shook his head. You're wrong. Am I? You don't understand. Mercer looked at the waiting crowd. Daniel Ashcroft smiled for the first time. Not happily. Hopefully. As though someone had finally asked the right question. Then from somewhere beneath the station, a loud crack echoed through the tunnel. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The ancient brickwork shuddered. Whitby looked upward. What was that? Before anyone could answer, the station lights flickered violently. The old locomotive released a deafening blast of steam. And for the first time in nearly a century, the signal at the end of the underground platform changed. From red to green, the green signal glowed with an almost unnatural brilliance. For more than a century, according to every record Jonathan Mercer had shown him, it had never displayed anything except red. Now the polished lens cast an emerald light across the underground platform. No one moved. Not Jonathan. Not Elias Rowe. Not the waiting passengers. Even the steam locomotive seemed to pause, its rhythmic hiss slowing until the depot fell into complete silence. Nathan Mercer broke it. "What does the green signal mean?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. His eyes never left the signal. Finally he spoke. "It means—" He swallowed. "The line has been cleared." "For what?" Jonathan looked at Mercer with quiet resignation. "For departure." Elias Rowe removed his cap. "It's been 84 years. Whitby frowned. 84 years since what? Since anyone asked the right question. Mercer noticed something change among the waiting passengers. They were beginning to look at one another. Some smiled. Others appeared uncertain. A little girl no older than 8 reached for her mother's hand. Richard Hale straightened his tie. Daniel Ashcroft looked toward the locomotive, then back at Mercer. For the first time since the journey had begun, they no longer looked like people trapped in a routine. They looked like people expecting something new. Jonathan stepped in front of Mercer. "You still don't understand." "Then explain it." "If that train leaves—" He pointed towards the locomotive. "It won't come back." Mercer waited. Jonathan continued. "The railway will end. Isn't that what you wanted to prevent?" "Yes." "Why?" Jonathan closed his eyes. "Because I was told that ending it would be catastrophic." "By whom?" "My father." "And who told him?" "My grandfather." "And before that?" Jonathan's shoulders slowly sank. "I don't know." Mercer nodded. "There it is." Whitby looked at him. "What?" The first assumption nobody ever questioned. Jonathan frowned. "My family protected this place. They believed they were protecting it." Mercer corrected him gently. "There's a difference." Mercer walked slowly towards the locomotive. The brass nameplate gleamed beneath the platform lights. "The last train to Blackmoor." He rested a hand on the warm metal. "You've all assumed this railway was built to imprison people." "No," Jonathan said quietly. "To preserve them." Mercer shook his head. "No." He turned to face the waiting passengers. "It was built to return them." A long silence followed. Then Elias Rowe laughed. Not mockingly. With genuine relief. "I was beginning to think no one ever would." Jonathan stared at him. "You knew." "I hoped." "You've let people disappear for generations." Rowe's expression darkened. "I guided them." "You trapped them." "I kept them safe." "From what?" Rowe looked toward the tunnel beyond the depot. "Time." Daniel Ashcroft stepped forward. His voice was calm. "When I boarded the train." Everyone turned towards him. "I was carrying evidence." Mercer nodded. "The satchel." Daniel smiled. "No. The truth." He glanced at Jonathan. "I discovered railway funds had been stolen for years." Whitby frowned. "By who?" Daniel shook his head. "Not one person." "Then who?" "A system." He explained quietly. For decades, Blackmoor's hidden railway had existed as a secure archive. Important evidence, official records, confidential documents, everything considered too valuable to lose was stored beneath the station. When the tunnel collapse occurred in 1884, the archive became inaccessible. The workers trapped below survived longer than anyone realized. Among them was Elias Rowe. They created a signaling system, a timetable, rules, a way to preserve order while rescue never came. When the last survivor died, the railway above had already forgotten them. Only stories remained. Generation after generation misunderstood those stories. Keep the line open. Never change the timetable. Protect passenger 17. Each instruction became more mysterious as its original purpose faded, until superstition replaced memory. Jonathan stood perfectly still. My father believed. He believed what his father told him. Daniel finished gently. And so did you. Whitby looked around the underground station. So this isn't haunted. Rose smiled. Oh, it is. Everyone looked at him. The past always haunts us. He placed a gloved hand on the locomotive. But not in the way people imagine. Mercer looked at the green signal. So why now? Rowe answered immediately. Because someone finally understood the difference between a prison. He looked at the waiting passengers. And a station. The signal bell rang once. A clear metallic tone echoed through the tunnels. Steam rose from beneath the locomotive's wheels. The engine slowly began to move. Not under anyone's control. Its pistons turned with smooth, effortless precision. The waiting passengers climbed aboard one by one. Daniel Ashcroft paused beside Mercer. Thank you. Mercer frowned. I haven't done anything. You remembered us. Daniel smiled. That's enough. He stepped into the carriage. Richard Hale followed. Then the missing constable. Then dozens of others, whose names had filled the ledgers for more than a century. Each paused only long enough to nod towards Mercer before boarding. Jonathan watched in silence. Tears filled his eyes. I wasted my life. Mercer placed a hand on his shoulder. No. You've been protecting an empty station. You protected hope. Jonathan looked at him. Even if I misunderstood it. Mercer smiled. Especially then. The whistle sounded. One final time. The train gathered speed, passing slowly along the hidden platform. As the last carriage drew level with Mercer, he noticed the brass plaque had changed. It no longer read the last train to Blackmoor. Now it bore a different inscription. The Homeward Express. The final carriage disappeared into the tunnel. The green signal flickered once, then went dark. For the first time in nearly 150 years, the underground station fell completely still. No whistles, no steam, no footsteps, only silence. Mercer thought the mystery was over. Then Oliver called from the archive. Inspector. His voice trembled. I think you need to see this. Mercer hurried back into the records room. The great wall of ledgers was changing. One by one. The books were fading. Not burning. Not crumbling. Simply disappearing. Until only a single ledger remained on the shelf. Mercer removed it carefully. The cover was blank. He opened the first page. Inside, in fresh ink, was a single handwritten sentence. Every mystery ends. Every story leaves someone to tell it. Beneath the words, someone had written an author's name. Nathan Mercer.